First, they came for the immigrants, and I stood up because families belong together. Then they came for the African Americans, and I stood up because Black Lives Matter. Then they came for the LGBTQ community, and I stood up because love is love. Then they came for the Asian Americans, and I stood up because stop Asian hate. And then they came for me, and I stood alone because I'm a Jew. I don't know how many of you saw that meme that went around the internet back in May and June when there was a significant increase in anti-Semitism in the world and in this country at the height of the most recent conflict between Israel and Hamas. I don't know how many of you saw it or how many felt as I did, but I felt very, very alone. I was saddened and honestly terrified by the silence of the world and even of my friends. And I remember one of those Shabbats, the Torah portion, the Parsha, was Balak. That's the portion where the prophet Balaam famously looks over at the Israelite people and says, Ma tovu halecha Yaakov, how good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, Israel. But this year I was struck by a very different line that I'd never really paid attention to before. This year I was struck by the line where he says, from the heights I gaze upon them, this is a people who dwell alone. Am levavad yishkon. A people who dwell alone, and yishkon is actually in the future tense there, so will dwell alone. So continuing the theme of the journey, tonight we're going to go to a dark part of our journey, a dark path along the life journey of the Jewish people. Because tonight I'm going to be talking about anti-Semitism. I suppose because it's Israel-related, you'd have to call it left-wing anti-Semitism, but the thing about anti-Semitism is it kind of defies traditional left and right-wing categories because the extremes kind of meet in the middle. And although I was taught in rabbinical school that I should never apologize for words that I feel passionately about, I do apologize if you heard almost the same sermon back in May and June, or if you heard a similar sermon 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. Because unfortunately, anti-Semitism is not something that goes away, and it's a topic that I feel like I need to talk about, I need to address as a rabbi every so often, especially when it significantly increases as it did this past year. I would love to be the ostrich that buries my head in the sand, but I can't. I feel like it really is my rabbinic obligation, even if all I'm doing is just documenting the increase in anti-Semitism over the years that I've been here. So we're going to be discussing anti-Semitism. As I mentioned, I felt very alone. I was depressed. I didn't want to talk to people. I didn't want to come into work. And at least one member of the congregation said afterward, I could see how much pain you were in your face, and my mask covered almost my entire face. So I was wondering at the time, is there anywhere to go for solace, comfort? Well, I couldn't go to the news. When it comes to coverage of Israel and the Palestinian conflict, I don't expect it to be unbiased. And that's not because the press is anti-Semitic at its core. It's maybe in some places, but really that's not it. There's a very different power dynamic. When Israel and the Palestinians are involved, the power dynamics are different. Israel has the power, and more Palestinians die than Israelis die. That is simply just a fact, and it's going to be covered that way. But it somehow just seemed a little bit different this time. Words like colonialism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide were thrown around loosely. And they were rarely challenged by the interviewer. And I heard and read a lot of the phrase killing children, Israel as child killers, which reminded me not so subtly of a blood libel that's been happening for 2,000 years. Now, from the Israeli perspective, none of it made sense. They didn't understand why they got no sympathy. In the mainstream Israeli view, they were operating a defensive war, defensive action, trying their best to minimize civilian deaths, while at the same time, their civilian population had bombs being rained upon them, so many that the Iron Dome couldn't stop them this time, coming from a place, Gaza, that they don't occupy, that they left in 2007, done by a terrorist organization, Hamas, who openly states that they want to destroy Israel. And if you read their charter, it's a lot worse than that. It actually talks about killing Jews, even if they're hiding behind trees. But we know that increasingly that's not how the world sees it. And increasingly, that's not even how most of the American Jewish community sees it. I couldn't go to the entertainment world to escape, not with comedians like John Oliver talking about war crimes on his comedy show, or with seemingly every celebrity in America having to post on Instagram or tweet out their own anti-Israel screeds. There was very rarely a tweet or a post about peace. In fact, if you did that, you were essentially ridiculed, even canceled. And they meant well, I suppose, right? They were doing it in the name of what they thought was justice, but really they bordered and sometimes crossed right over the border into anti-Semitism. And your kids and my kids had to read about it all the time because they were reposted and retweeted by all their friends. And their friends and the celebrities know nothing, for the most part, about the Israeli-Palestinian situation. They know nothing about the nuances. They kept using those same extremist terms, colonialism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide. It would take me a separate lecture to explain why none of those apply, but I do want to mention genocide just for a moment. A lot of the celebrities even called their own, I guess, fellow celebrity, Israeli celebrity, Gal Gadot, genocidal Barbie, because, of course, she served in the Israeli Defense Forces. Genocide is what the Nazis tried to do to the Jews. Genocide is what the Turks tried to do to the Armenians. Genocide is what happened in former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Genocide is not when a population increases from 1 to 4 million since the 1960s. Okay, that is not genocide. But this kind of anti-Semitism does not care about nuance. Am levavad yishkon, we are a people who dwell alone. I couldn't go to the usual progressive allies who normally we seek common cause with, but in this case, there were so many of these organizations, nothing to do with Israel, any of these organizations, nothing to say about human rights violations anywhere in the world, but they too had to take a firmly anti-Israel stand, not a pro-peace stand, just an anti-Israel stand. Organizations like the Chicago Dyke March, or various teachers' unions, or the Berkeley Rent Stabilization Board, or the Society for Children's Authors and Illustrators. I bet you don't even know, very few of you probably know about this one. This one is particularly bizarre. This organization has a diversity and inclusion officer who is, or rather was, a black Jewish woman. And when anti-Semitism was on the increase, she sent out a message decrying anti-Semitism and asking for peace and calm. But because they viewed her as taking sides in the conflict, even though it was not about Israel, because it didn't mention Islamophobia, she was forced to resign. Similar situation occurred with the president of Rutgers University. Rutgers has a significant Jewish population, both student and faculty. The president of Rutgers was very worried about the safety of the Jewish community on the campus. He sent out a letter to the community decrying the increase in anti-Semitism. But again, because he was said to be picking sides, and again, this was not about Israel, his letter, because he didn't mention other marginalized groups, he had to send out an apology letter 2 days later. And then, of course, it got worse at Rutgers. The Student Activities Commission has succeeded in defunding Hillel because Hillel has a connection to Israel, even though it's a very diverse connection. No student activity money will go to Hillel there. You don't have to worry about the Hillel. They have outside funding, all right? That's not who funds it, but just the idea. It also happened at Pomona College in California, and I promise it's coming to a campus near you. And you can try to explain about the difference between occupied land and not occupied land, and the difference between the 1948 borders and the 1967 borders, and how there wasn't a Palestinian state when Jordan had control of it either. And you can try to talk about the fact that that Israel at least 3 times offered peace, giving up 97% of the West Bank. You can talk about the tech advances and the medical advances and the idea that they have now the most diverse government in their history. But nobody cares, because this kind of anti-Semitism has no room for nuance. Am levavad yishkon. We are a people who dwell alone. I would have loved to have gone to my interfaith colleagues, and I tried, but my phone calls and emails were not returned. Maybe it's because they're too busy. Maybe they just don't want to get involved and stick themselves in the middle, and I can fully understand that. But it was much worse than that. It wasn't just a silence. There were several who were simply fanning the flames. Part of an email list of something 90-odd interfaith folks, clergy and others who are involved in interfaith issues. And some of the letters that went out, and then the support for those letters, I mean, they really made me sick to my stomach. There was one that I remember very clearly that talked about how it's not a conflict. Don't call it a conflict. It's Israel's apartheid and ethnic cleansing. It's not a conflict. And anyone who doesn't take a specifically anti-Israel stand has actual blood on their hands. Those were the words, actual blood on their hands. I tried to reach out to the head of the organization, did not return my email or phone call. I thought, you know, what do I do when I'm seeing these letters? Do I respond and try to clarify things and talk about the nuance and the complexity, the conflict to the group? And in the end, I chickened out. Because these kinds of email dialogues, internet back and forth, don't generally yield light. They generally just yield more flames. And some of the efforts to reach out to individuals were also just ignored. Again, this kind of anti-Semitism does not really consider nuance. I really felt like part of an Am levavad yishkon, a people dwelling alone. You know, I couldn't even turn to the freezer for comfort because now Ben & Jerry's was part of the boycott of Israel, or at least part of Israel. And it's more complicated than you think. I can't get into it, it'll take me too long, but one of the reasons that they responded this way is because of social media comments on their sites. Comments like, eating Ben & Jerry's ice cream feels like eating the blood of Palestinian children. I mean, just vile, horrible stuff. But again, this kind of anti-Semitism has no room for nuance. Am levavad yishkon, we are a people who dwell alone. Now, I imagine at least some of you are saying to yourselves, these are not necessarily examples of anti-Semitism. This is just anti-Zionism, or maybe just legitimate criticism of Israel. Can you not criticize Israel without being called an anti-Semite? Do you agree with every action the Israeli government takes? Of course not. But of course I don't agree with every action the Israeli government takes. And of course you can criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic, even though a lot of that criticism often does involve demonization and delegitimization and double standards. And I feel like if you're doing it, you're kind of piling on, okay? It's not as if it isn't happening like everywhere. But On the other hand, and I'm going to do a couple of tevias here, a couple of on the other hands right now. It's taken me a long time to truly understand that even the harshest anti-Israel rhetoric, some of it is legitimate criticism, and there's lots to be criticized. Some of it is just brutal anti-Israel rhetoric, and many actually don't believe that the state of Israel should exist. But even some of that, it does not come from an anti-Semitic place. It's hard not to see it that way, but it really doesn't. Often, the intentions are actually very good. And they're coming increasingly from ourselves, from the American Jewish community. There was a recent survey that says something like a third of American Jews under 30 actually don't believe Israel should exist as a state. A third of Jews under 30. I found that, very disturbing, of course. These Jews anti-Semitic, they're not, many of them are not ignorant. They've been to Israel. Their Jewish identity is important to them. Israel's not important to them, but their Jewish identity is. They just have a very different perspective. Do I agree with that perspective? Of course not. I find it dangerously naive. But we can't just write them off, right? We're going to have to learn to live together in community, as frightening as that prospect is to me personally. But on the other hand, there's a reason for the expression, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. If you didn't understand that anti-Israel rhetoric actually leads to anti-Semitic action, you should have learned it from this conflict. There was a 400% increase in anti-Semitic acts. It was bad enough having to read the stuff on Twitter and Instagram. But I'm talking actions. I'm talking vandalism. I'm talking violence. We're talking about gravestones overturned. We're talking about graffiti, sometimes which said Free Palestine, sometimes which said death to Jews, on Hillel houses, Jewish fraternities, preschools in Noe Valley in San Francisco, Manny's Cafe in San Francisco. For God's sake, there were people literally being beaten up in the streets in New York and Los Angeles for being Jewish. And you know what? Nobody asked those Jews if they were Zionist or anti-Zionist. Nobody asked those Jews if they supported the Netanyahu government or the Bennett government or any other government. Nobody asked those Jews how they felt about Israel. This kind of anti-Semitism does not understand nuance. Am levavad yishkon. We are a people who dwell alone. And I have another on the other hand, which is to say that while Israel may not be an important part of lots of American Jews' identity, including many of yours, to say that it's not an important part of Judaism, I believe, is simply to ignore Jewish teachings. Now, first of all, there's our historical connection, that Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel because that's where we came together as a people. We long to get back there for 2,000 years, and I still think it's the only safe place that Jews can go when something goes awry, as it has in many countries, or if some kind of global anti-Semitic Holocaust-like event were to take place. And I know most of you don't believe that could happen, or maybe now you maybe see how it possibly could, although I don't think we're anywhere near there. There's that historical connection. I'm talking about something more basic than that even. First of all, you know what you say at the end of every Passover Seder, right? You say, next year in Jerusalem. We actually end Yom Kippur with that too. L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim, right after the shofar blow. Next year in Jerusalem. But it actually comes also, Israel and Zion and Jerusalem are mentioned at the most important events in Jewish life. There was a weekend during the conflict where I conducted both a wedding and a funeral. Most of the audiences at that wedding and funeral were not Jewish. You know how a Jewish wedding ends? Well, if you if you think about if you consider the ending to be the Sheva Brachot, the 7 blessings, the 7th blessing talks about how we're rejoicing in the streets of Jerusalem and in the cities of Judah because a Jewish couple's getting married. And then, at an Orthodox ceremony, when the groom stomps on the glass, he says, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim. If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand lose its ability to even function. You know how a Jewish funeral ends? We form 2 rows, and the direct mourners walk through the rows, and you know what you say to those people? You say, may God console you with all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. We also say it l'chadodi every Friday night. That's Zionism. And I remember thinking at this wedding and this funeral, what are these people going to think? We're at the height of the conflict. I'm about to mention Jerusalem and Zion. Am I going to have to change the liturgy here? Now, I never would have, but that the thought occurred to me really blew my mind. Of course, I immediately thought, you know, even if I offend people here, they'll come to see that Jerusalem and Israel are really central to Judaism and the Jewish people. So if you were coming for comfort tonight to Kol Nidre, I didn't give it to you. And, you know, when I speak about anti-Semitism, there will be those who ask me, did you have to do it on the one of the holiest nights of the year? And Dafka, yes, because it's that important. And that's why I do it on Yom Kippur. But that's also why I do it on Yom Kippur evening, because that's not what I want to leave you with. Because tomorrow, I promise we're going to step out of the shadows and step back into the light. But even on the dark path that we traveled tonight, there are lanterns that light the way. There are organizations like the ADL and the American Jewish Committee, both worthy of your donations, who are documenting these things and educating people. There are organizations like Zionists, Jewish Women's Organization, which spends time at protests and on the internet, refusing to cede the public square to Israel haters. There are my friends Dumasani and Joshua Washington, who established the IBSI, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, and they spend time on college campuses educating people, and they're recruiting ministers for trips to Israel. If you know one, let me know that you think might be interested in going. They actually have to be African American because this is specifically for black ministers, but if you know one, let me know. I will pass that information on. And there's my own family. My wife, Karen, and my sons, Micah and Jonah, are much more courageous than I am with this stuff. Karen's a part of every anti-racism organization that exists in her school district, mostly to fight racism, but also to make sure that those organizations don't become the next Berkeley Rent Stabilization Board and stay in their lane. My son Micah has been one of the student leaders for all 4 years on his campus, The Ohio State University, fighting boycotts of Israel. And Jonah, at his senior year of high school, at the height of this conflict, when he would see these posts from acquaintances and friends on Instagram, he would swipe on them, and he would basically say, can we talk about this? And he would actually try to explain different perspectives, opening minds one at a time. I'm very proud of them. And they're, much, like I said, much more courageous than I am. So all these organizations and my family members, they give us hope. And so does the history of the resilience of the Jewish people. And on a real gut faith level, that Hashem, that God has been there for us, even when times were darkest. Because we also say in the Passover Haggadah, V'him she'amda, God and the Torah have stood by us, even when more than one enemy has come to destroy the people Israel. The Holy One, blessed be God, delivers us. V'hi she'amda lavotenu, V'hi she'amda Lavotenu velanu, velo echad bilvad, Amar aleinu, Amar aleinu, Amar aleinu v'chalotenu, v'kadosh baruch hu matzilenu, matzilenu, mi adam, yai nai nai nai, yai nai 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 nai. The Holy One, blessed be God, has always delivered us. Tomorrow, we'll step back into the light. Until then, Tzom Kol, have an easy fast, and Gamar Chatima Tova.